The Boston Molasses Flood by Jay Gillum. The year was 1919. The First World War had just ended, and America was entering a new chapter. Industrial companies were scrambling to meet the demands of a growing economy. One of those companies was the United States Industrial Alcohol Company, or the USIA. They used molasses. The tank for the molasses was enormous, being 50 feet tall and 90 feet wide. It was capable of holding 2.5 million gallons of molasses. This was 1,400 tons, being that molasses is 40% more dense than water. When the tank was constructed in 1915, it groaned and leaked, and the locals would even bring jars to collect some of the molasses that had leaked out. It was made of rivets and steel plates, and there were no inspections on this tank. There was no oversight from anybody. At 12:40 p.m., the tank exploded. Witnesses said there was a thundering sound, and it sounded like gunshots. This was the rivets blowing out. 2.3 million gallons of molasses had flooded out into the streets. A wave of molasses 25 feet high surged through the streets at 30 miles an hour. People and horses were swept off their feet and taken away by the thick wave of molasses. Overall, 21 people were dead, with their bodies being stuck in the molasses, suffocated, and some not even found until weeks later. In some of the damage, train cars had been swept away, people and animals were certainly taken away, and there was a half a mile of destruction. The cleanup. Thankfully, there was a warship off the coast carrying about 115 sailors, and they noticed the commotion. So these people, the sailors, they came in and they managed to rescue 20 people before the actual firefighters and police officers could arrive. Over 300 workers, including the Red Cross volunteers, Army, and Navy, used shovels, saws, and salt water to break down the molasses. Fire hoses sprayed down the streets, while pumps tried to move the syrup out to the harbor. The molasses stuck to everything: people's clothes, horses' hooves, sidewalks, and staircases. The water in the harbor was brown until the summer. Everything that people had touched with their molasses hands had to be thrown away due to how sticky everything became. This whole process took 87,000 man-hours. The investigation. After the flood, lawsuits had poured in. Over 100 claims were filed against the USIA. This was one of the first major class action lawsuits in US history. The investigation had revealed that many, what many already suspected, the tank was poorly designed and never tested for safety. The tank was actually constructed by the company's financial advisor and was built quickly in under 2 months' time. This tank had never been through any safety factor or any calculations had been made on this tank. the lessons learned. The rivets had blown out due to the increased pressure from the higher than average temperature at the time. That day it was 40 degrees Fahrenheit in January, but just a week before it had been below freezing temperatures, around 5 degrees Fahrenheit. This increased the pressure in the tank, and due to fermentation inside the tank and no way to bleed the air pressure, the tank had simply blown up. There was no code enforcement on this building. It was never tested under load, and there was no building permit or inspection done to this tank. Changes to the field of engineering. The engineering standards had changed drastically after this major disaster. Cities began requiring licensed engineers to sign off on large construction products. Building codes became stricter, and forensics engineering had started. This is analyzing failures after they happen to see what went wrong and what can be improved upon. Also, the accountability of engineers was taken into consideration, and if the designer should be let off the hook or charged for the crimes he committed. The overall outcome. Today, the site of the flood is quiet, and few tourists go there for this disaster that happened 100 years ago. The architect was found guilty, and the class action lawsuit that was against USIA was they were deemed liable, and somewhere between $300,000 to $600,000 were paid to the families of the victims that were affected. This is a good lesson on not to cut corners, especially back in these early times. They really didn't understand the full effects of what would happen from a failure. I'm sure that if the architect knew of the major devastation that he could have caused by skipping these engineering codes and not doing any calculations, then lives could have been saved. Thank you. The end.